Once upon a time, in a quiet village nestled between towering grey mountains, beneath an endless sky of soft, pale clouds, lived a girl named Elara. Her world was colourless, not just the stones of the streets or the walls of the houses, but even the clothes people wore and the fields they tilled. The sun shone, but its light was dull, like an old lantern whose flame had grown tired. No one in the village remembered a time when colours danced through the world. The elders whispered of golden mornings and sapphire skies, of emerald forests and crimson roses, but they spoke of these things like distant dreams, as if the world had simply forgotten how to shine. And yet, in Elara's heart, a longing stirred, a longing for something more. One day, as Elara wandered past the edges of her village, she followed the soft whisper of the wind through a thicket of bare trees. There, half hidden beneath a veil of ivy, stood a forgotten cottage. Its wooden door, worn with time, was slightly ajar. With cautious steps, Elara entered. Inside, dust danced in the air, catching what little light seeped through the broken windows. The room was nearly empty, except for something tucked into the farthest corner, a loom. But not just any loom. This one was unlike anything Elara had ever seen. Its frame was carved from silverwood, polished so finely it shimmered. Strange symbols wound along its edges, and stretched across it was a single golden thread, glowing faintly as if waiting. As Elara reached out and brushed the thread, a spark of colour burst into the air. It swirled and shimmered, soft as mist, bright as morning. The colour landed on her fingertip, sinking into her skin, and suddenly, for the first time in her life, Elara saw the blue of her own veins. Trembling with wonder, Elara sat before the loom and picked up the shuttle. She had never woven before, yet as she moved the shuttle through the golden thread, instinct guided her hands. As the first thread passed through, a stripe of red flowed from the loom, rolling outward like a wave of light. The second, a deep, rich orange. With each pass, a new colour bloomed: yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, until a rainbow cloth spilled onto the floor, humming with energy. Elara's breath caught. The world around her still remained grey, but the cloth in her hands glowed like sunrise. She wrapped it around her shoulders and stepped outside. The moment the wind touched it, colours rippled outward, sinking into the ground, creeping up tree trunks, swirling into the sky. The world gasped awake. The first streak of blue swept across the heavens. The first bloom of green unfurled in the fields. And yet, just as quickly as it came, the colour faded. The trees returned to grey, the sky dimmed, the cloth in Elara's hands dulling to pale silver. The magic was fleeting. The world wanted more. Elara hurried home, heart pounding with excitement and fear. She had found the secret to bringing colour back, but should she share it? She thought of her quiet village, the people who had long accepted their world of grey. What if they didn't understand? What if someone tried to take the loom from her? So she kept the secret to herself. Each night, she slipped away to the cottage and wove more rainbow cloth. She stitched pieces into her cloak, into her shoes, even wove a ribbon for her hair. Wherever she walked, she left traces of colour behind. A red rosebud, a golden leaf, a blue feather drifting on the wind. People began to wonder. They whispered of a girl who carried the dawn in her footsteps. Some followed her trails of colour, desperate to know where they led. And then, one evening, a little boy tugged on her cloak and asked, "Why does the world wake up only where you walk?" Elara's heart ached. What good was colour if it belonged only to her? That night, Elara sat before the loom, staring at the glowing threads. She had a choice. She could weave the colours for herself, live in a world of beauty while the rest of the village remained grey. Or she could do something greater. With a deep breath, Elara picked up the shuttle. This time, she didn't weave a single cloth. She wove a sky full of colours. She wove the gold of sunlight, the blue of deep lakes, the green of forests long forgotten. She wove enough colour for the world, and when the final thread was pulled, the loom began to hum. The rainbow cloth lifted into the air, unravelling. Threads of light spun outward, racing across the sky, across mountains and rivers, across the village and beyond. People woke to find roses blushing red, wheat fields golden, rivers shimmering in sapphire hues. Laughter rang as they twirled in meadows now bursting with colour, their faces painted with the hues of joy. And as the colour spread, the loom, its purpose fulfilled, slowly faded away, vanishing into the wind like a whispered secret. Elara stood on the hilltop, watching in awe as the colours unfolded like the petals of a long sleeping flower. It was no longer just streaks of red and gold or splashes of blue and green. It was life itself, awakened in ways she could barely comprehend. The sky stretched overhead, a breathtaking canvas of dawn and dusk entwined, where the deepest blues kissed the softest pinks, and golden sunlight filtered through clouds tinged with lavender and peach. Birds, their wings now gleaming in dazzling hues, soared across the heavens, their songs rippling through the air like a long-lost melody. Below, the village that had once been grey was now bursting with colour. The stone cottages stood warm under the embrace of the sun, their walls reflecting soft shades of ochre, russet, and sapphire. Windowsills overflowed with blushing roses, golden marigolds, and violets that shimmered in the morning light. Laughter echoed through the streets as people marvelled at their new world. Children ran through the meadows, their hands outstretched, spinning in dizzy delight as fields of emerald grass swayed like an ocean of colour. They wove crowns from wildflowers the world had forgotten, pressing them onto their heads like little kings and queens of a bright new kingdom. The elders traced their fingertips over trees now covered in soft pink blossoms, their eyes shining with unshed tears as they remembered the legends they had spoken of for so long. Legends that were no longer myths, but real, breathing truths before them. And in the very heart of the village, people gathered in the square, standing beneath a fountain that now shimmered with water so clear and blue, it reflected the sky like a mirror. Then something wonderful happened. A little girl with auburn curls and golden freckles tugged at her mother's sleeve and pointed up toward the hill where Elara stood. "It was her," the girl whispered. She brought the colours back. Slowly, one by one, the villagers turned their gaze to Elara. Some gasped. Others clutched their hands to their chests. The baker, covered in flour, let out a joyful laugh, while the old storyteller wiped a tear from his eye. And then they began to climb. A procession of voices, young and old, rising toward her like a river of gratitude. They carried gifts, freshly picked flowers, ribbons of silk, baskets of fruit so bright they looked like drops of sunshine. Elara stepped forward, suddenly uncertain. She had never expected this. She had woven the colours for the world, not for recognition. But then, a little boy no older than 5 broke free from the crowd, his small hands clutching something. A single red rose. He held it up to her, his eyes wide with admiration, his voice barely above a whisper. "For you." Elara took the flower, her fingers trembling as she held it close. And in that moment, something warm bloomed deep in her chest, a realization as golden as the dawn now painting the horizon. She had given the world color, but in return, they had given her something far greater: belonging, love, home. A gentle breeze lifted her hair, carrying whispers of laughter, of life renewed, of a world that would never fade again. And as Elara stood there, surrounded by the people she had once feared wouldn't understand, she smiled, because she knew at last that she had woven not just colors into the world, she had woven joy, hope, and endless possibility. And the world would never forget the Rainbow Weaver. Once upon a time, in a world not so different from our own, there existed a magical craft known to only a few: star-gathering. High above the earth, where the sky turned velvet black and the stars shimmered like scattered diamonds, a guild of star-gatherers tended to the night sky. Their role was simple yet profound: to catch fallen stars and return them to their rightful place, ensuring that the heavens remained bright and beautiful for dreamers below. Our story begins with a young girl named Elira, an apprentice to the wisest of the star-gatherers, Master Liran. Elira had always dreamed of the stars. As a child, she would sit by her window, tracing constellations with her finger and wondering what it might be like to hold a star in her hands. Her dreams came true when Liran chose her to become his apprentice. With her curious heart and steady hands, she showed promise, but she was still learning. Elira's favorite possession was her lantern, gifted to her by Master Liran on her first night as an apprentice. It was no ordinary lantern. Its frame was made of shimmering silver, its glass panes enchanted to capture the glow of the stars. This lantern, Liran had said, is the tool of a star-gatherer and a companion to your journey. Treat it well, and it will never fail you. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky came alive with falling stars. They streaked across the heavens, leaving trails of golden light. It was a sight both beautiful and foreboding. For a star-gatherer, this meant work. Stars that fell from the sky had to be caught and returned before they could fade entirely. Elira stood on the edge of a high cliff, her lantern in hand. She could feel the cool night breeze against her cheeks, carrying the faint scent of blooming night flowers. Master Liran was beside her, his tall frame outlined against the twinkling sky. "Tonight, Elira," he said, his voice calm but commanding, "you will take the lead. Trust your instincts, and remember, the stars will guide you if you let them." Elira nodded, her heart thumping with a mix of excitement and nerves. She watched as a cluster of stars began to fall toward a nearby forest. With a deep breath, she stepped forward and raised her lantern. It glowed softly, as if sensing her determination. The first star she caught was warm and weightless, like holding a piece of sunlight. It shimmered inside the lantern, filling it with a soft golden glow. Elira couldn't help but smile. "Well done," said Liran, his eyes twinkling like the stars themselves. "Now, let us gather the rest." As the night went on, Elira grew more confident. She chased fallen stars through meadows, across rivers, and into hidden groves. Her lantern shone brightly, a beacon of hope in the dark. But just as they were nearing the end of their task, a mischievous cloud appeared. This was no ordinary cloud. It was dark and playful, its edges flickering with flashes of silver lightning. It swooped down from the sky, its laughter like the soft rumble of distant thunder. With a great gust of wind, it scattered the stars that Elira had so carefully gathered. They flew in every direction, disappearing into the night. "No!" Elira cried, clutching her lantern tightly. Her heart sank as she saw the golden lights fade into the distance. The sky seemed darker now, almost mournful. Leoran placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "Do not despair, Elira. The stars are not lost, only misplaced. We must find them again. This will be your true test." Elira took a deep breath, her determination rekindled. "I won't let them fade," she said. "I'll bring them back." And so Elira's journey began. The scattered stars had fallen across a magical land, each one hidden in a place of wonder and mystery. With her lantern in hand, she ventured into the unknown. The first star had landed in a field of glowing flowers. The blossoms pulsed with soft light, their colors shifting like the aurora. Elira marveled at their beauty but remembered her task. She knelt beside a cluster of flowers and whispered gently to the star hiding within. It flickered shyly before floating into her lantern, its glow merging with the others. The next star had found its way to a crystal-clear lake. Its surface reflected the night sky so perfectly that it was impossible to tell where the water ended and the heavens began. Elira waded into the lake, feeling the cool water lap against her ankles. She reached out, and the star leapt into her hand, its warmth a stark contrast to the chilly water. In a shadowy forest, she encountered a star tangled in the branches of an ancient tree. The tree's bark was etched with runes that glowed faintly, as if alive. Elira spoke kindly to the tree, asking for its help. Slowly, the branches parted, releasing the star into her lantern. As Elira continued her journey, she came across creatures in need of help. A small fox with a thorn in its paw limped toward her, whimpering softly. She paused to tend to the fox, earning its gratitude. In return, the fox led her to a hidden cave where another star had fallen. In a mountain pass, she encountered a grumpy old troll guarding a bridge. He demanded a toll, but Elira had nothing to give. Instead, she offered him a story, weaving a tale so enchanting that the troll forgot his grumpiness and allowed her to pass. On the other side, she found a star nestled among the rocks. Through each challenge, Elira's kindness and determination shone brightly, guiding her like a lantern in the dark. At last, Elira came to a vast open plain. In the center stood the mischievous cloud, now calm and still. The final star hovered just above it, pulsing with a soft golden light. Elira approached cautiously. "Why did you scatter the stars?" she asked gently. The cloud rumbled softly, its voice like a distant storm. "I was lonely," it admitted. "I only wanted to play." Elira's heart softened. "You don't have to be lonely," she said. "The stars are friends to all who cherish them. Will you help me return them?" The cloud hesitated, then slowly lowered the final star into her lantern. "I'm sorry," it said. "Thank you for understanding." With all the stars safely gathered, Elira and Leoran returned to the highest cliff. Together they released the stars back into the sky. One by one they rose, their light growing brighter, until the heavens were filled with their familiar glow. Elira's heart swelled with pride and joy. She had faced challenges, shown kindness, and stayed true to her purpose. Master Leoran smiled, his eyes twinkling. "You've done well, Elira. Tonight, you've not only lit the sky, but also proven yourself a true star-gatherer." And so, under a sky full of stars, Elira began her journey as a full-fledged star-gatherer, her lantern glowing brightly, a beacon of hope and light for all who dreamed beneath the night sky. Once upon a time, in a little village nestled between rolling hills and an ancient forest, there lived a shy young girl named Lyra. Lyra was the kind of girl who spoke softly, walked quietly, and spent most of her days with her nose buried in books. Books were her escape, her refuge from the noisy, bustling world around her. But even in her beloved books, she found herself wishing for something more, an adventure of her own, one that might help her find the courage she so often admired in the characters she read about. Lyra's home was a small cottage on the edge of the woods. Her father was a carpenter, her mother a weaver, and though they were kind and loving, they often worried about how shy and reserved their daughter seemed. Lyra, however, found her joy in the forest. It was her sanctuary, a place where she felt free to dream and imagine. The towering trees, with their whispering leaves, felt like old friends, and the soft carpet of moss beneath her feet was as comforting as any hug. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a deep indigo, Lyra decided to take a walk in the forest. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the earthy scent of pine and wildflowers. The moon was rising, full and luminous, casting a silvery glow over the landscape. Lyra often took these evening walks. They were her favorite part of the day, a time when the world seemed quieter and her thoughts clearer. But this night was different. As she wandered deeper into the woods, a faint glow caught her eye. It wasn't the light of fireflies, nor was it the soft luminescence of the moon. It was something else entirely, gentle and inviting, like the flicker of a candle in the distance. Curious, Lyra followed the light, her heart fluttering with both excitement and apprehension. The glow led her to a clearing she had never seen before. In the center stood a magnificent oak tree, its branches sprawling wide and heavy, with leaves that shimmered like silver under the moonlight. At the base of the tree was a door, small, round, and carved with intricate patterns of stars and swirling vines. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. A door in a tree? She had read about such things in stories, but had never imagined she might find one herself. With trembling hands, she reached out and turned the brass handle. The door creaked open, revealing a spiral staircase that seemed to descend into the heart of the earth. The light she had followed spilled out from within, warm and golden. Taking a deep breath, Lyra stepped inside. The air grew cooler as she descended, carrying the faint, musty scent of old paper and ink. When she reached the bottom of the staircase, she found herself standing in the most extraordinary room she had ever seen. It was a library, an enormous, circular space filled with towering bookshelves that stretched up into the shadows above. The shelves were crammed with books of all shapes and sizes, their spines glinting in the golden light of floating lanterns that drifted lazily through the air. At the center of the room was a wooden desk, and perched on it was a large owl with feathers as white as snow and eyes that glowed like amber. The owl turned its head to regard Lyra, and to her astonishment, it spoke. "Well, well," the owl said in a deep, melodic voice. "What have we here? A visitor to the moonlit library. It's been a long time since anyone found their way here." Lyra blinked, unsure if she was dreaming. The moonlit library?" she stammered. The owl nodded. "Indeed, a place where stories come to life, and where those who seek answers often find them. Tell me, child, what brings you here?" Lyra hesitated. She wasn't sure how to answer. She hadn't been looking for anything in particular, at least not consciously. But deep down, she knew what she wanted. She wanted to feel brave. She wanted to believe in herself. I don't know," she said softly. "I just followed the light." The owl tilted its head, its eyes gleaming with a mixture of curiosity and wisdom. "Ah, the light," it murmured. "It only appears to those who need it most. You may not know why you're here, but the library does. Come." With a graceful sweep of its wings, the owl flew across the room to one of the bookshelves. It plucked a book from the shelf with its talons and brought it back to Lyra, dropping it gently into her hands. The cover was embossed with silver letters that shimmered in the light. The tale of the brave sparrow. "This is where we begin," the owl said. "Open the book and let the story guide you." Lyra hesitated, then carefully opened the book. As she did, the words on the pages began to glow, and the room around her dissolved into a swirl of colors and light. She felt herself being pulled into the story, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. When the light faded, she found herself standing in a meadow, the sky above her a brilliant shade of blue. In the distance, she saw a small sparrow perched on a branch, its feathers ruffled by the wind. The sparrow looked at her with bright, intelligent eyes and chirped, "Are you here to help me?" Lyra stood in the sunlit meadow, the gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers. The little sparrow perched on a low branch tilted its head at her and chirped again. "Are you here to help me?" Lyra hesitated, unsure how to respond. I think so," she said tentatively. The sparrow fluttered down to the ground and puffed out its chest. "Then you must hurry. The hawk has stolen my courage and hidden it on the tallest cliff. Without it, I can't fly as high as I'm meant to, and I'll never be able to join my flock in the great sky dance." Lyra blinked in surprise. "Your courage? Stolen?" "Yes," the sparrow exclaimed. "The hawk swooped down and snatched it right out of my heart. Please, will you help me get it back?" Lyra felt a swell of determination. "I'll help you," she said firmly. The sparrow led her through the meadow and into a dense forest. The trees whispered secrets as they passed, and the sunlight filtered through the leaves in golden beams. They climbed rocky paths and crossed a sparkling stream, where Lyra helped the sparrow hop across on the stones. Finally, they reached the base of a towering cliff. High above, a nest of twisted branches clung precariously to the edge, and a shadow circled the sky. "The hawk, I can't go up there," the sparrow said, trembling. "But you can!" Lyra looked up at the daunting cliff. Her palms grew sweaty, and doubt crept into her mind. "What if I fall? What if I fail?" But then she glanced at the sparrow, who looked at her with such trust and hope. Taking a deep breath, she started to climb. The rocks were sharp under her hands, and the wind whipped her hair, but she kept going. Halfway up, she heard a screech, and the hawk swooped down, its golden eyes gleaming. "Why do you climb, little one?" the hawk demanded. "I've come to get the sparrow's courage back," Lyra replied, her voice trembling but steady. The hawk chuckled. "Courage is not something you can take, it must be claimed. If you wish to prove yourself, you must stand your ground and face me." Lyra's heart pounded. The hawk was enormous, its wings stretching wide against the sky. She wanted to run, but she took another deep breath and stood tall. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, even though her legs shook. The hawk regarded her for a moment, then nodded. "Very well, you have earned it. It spread its wings, revealing a glowing golden orb nestled in its feathers. With a flick of its talon, the hawk released the orb, and it floated down to Lyra. When she returned to the sparrow, the little bird chirped with joy as the golden light sank into its chest. "You did it!" the sparrow exclaimed. "You were brave for me and for yourself." As the sparrow took to the sky, flying higher than ever, Lyra felt a warm glow in her own heart. She hadn't just helped the sparrow, she had found her own courage too. The meadow began to shimmer, and the scene dissolved. Lyra was back in the library, the book closed in her hands. The owl perched nearby, watching her with keen eyes. "You did well," it said. "Are you ready for another?" Lyra nodded eagerly. The owl plucked another book from the shelf and dropped it into her hands. The cover depicted a castle shrouded in mist, with ghostly figures wandering its halls. "This one is a little different," the owl said, "but I think you'll find it enlightening." Lyra opened the book, and once again, the world around her dissolved. She found herself standing before a grand, crumbling castle. The air was heavy with silence, broken only by the rustle of wind through the trees. As she stepped inside, she felt a chill, as though the walls themselves were watching her. "Who dares enter the kingdom of forgotten voices?" A whispery voice echoed through the halls. Lyra looked around but saw no one. "I'm just visiting," she said hesitantly. "You have come to help," another voice said, this one softer. Ghostly figures began to emerge from the shadows, their forms faint and flickering. They were the spirits of those who had lost their voices, those who had been silenced by fear, doubt, or others' cruelty. "Why have you lost your voices?" Lyra asked. "The Keeper of Shadows stole them," one spirit said, its tone mournful. "It traps our words in jars and keeps them hidden in the deepest part of the castle." Lyra's heart ached for them. "I'll get them back," she promised. The spirits guided her through the castle's winding corridors, where the walls whispered secrets and the floor creaked underfoot. Finally, she reached a grand chamber filled with shelves of glass jars, each glowing faintly with trapped words. The Keeper of Shadows loomed in the corner, a tall, shadowy figure with glowing red eyes. "Leave this place!" it hissed. "I can't," Lyra said, her voice trembling. "I'm here to free the voices you've taken." The Keeper laughed, its form growing larger. "You think you can defeat me, little one?" Lyra clenched her fists. "I may be small, but I won't let fear stop me." She reached for the nearest jar, and as her fingers closed around it, she felt a surge of warmth and light. The jar shattered, and a voice, strong and clear, filled the room. One by one, Lyra freed the voices, and with each jar she broke, the Keeper of Shadows grew weaker until it vanished altogether. The spirits, now restored, thanked her with glowing smiles before disappearing into the light. Lyra's adventures continued, each story teaching her something new: compassion, self-worth, resilience. By the time she finished her final book, she stood taller, her heart brimming with the lessons she had learned. When the owl returned her to the library for the last time, it said, "You've done well, Lyra. You've learned that the greatest stories are the ones we live ourselves. Now, take these lessons into your own life and never stop writing your own tale." And as Lyra walked back to her village under the glowing moon, she felt that she wasn't just a shy girl anymore. She was Lyra, the girl who had faced her fears, found her voice, and discovered her own kind of magic. Once upon a time, in a quiet corner of the world where the hills rolled like waves and the skies stretched endlessly blue, there lay a tiny village called Silverbrook. The village was so small that visitors often missed it entirely, their eyes fixed on the grand mountains that framed its borders. But Silverbrook held a secret, one that only its villagers knew. On the edge of the village, nestled at the foot of the tallest mountain, there lay a dragon. Now, this was not the kind of dragon that knights set out to slay or that hoarded treasures in dark caves. No, this dragon was sleepy. Its name was Solmere, though most villagers simply called it the Sleeping One. For as long as anyone could remember, Solmere had been curled up on a bed of moss and flowers, its massive, shimmering body rising and falling with each deep, peaceful breath. Its scales gleamed in the sunlight like rippling gold in the day and soft silver under the moon. Some believed Solmere was a guardian, protecting the village from unseen dangers. Others whispered that the dragon's dreams kept the balance of the world intact, but no one dared disturb it, for it was said that whoever woke the dragon would bring about chaos. And so life in Silverbrook went on, quiet and unassuming, under the gentle watch of the Sleeping One. But, as is often the way in stories, something extraordinary was about to happen. In Silverbrook lived a curious child named Elara. With wild curls and a constant gleam in her hazel eyes, Elara was known for her endless questions and her knack for wandering where she wasn't supposed to. While other children played in the village square, Elara could often be found exploring the woods, chasing butterflies, or gazing up at the dragon from a safe distance. Elara wasn't afraid of Solmere. If anything, she was fascinated by the great creature. She loved watching the sunlight dance on its scales and listening to the deep rumbling purr of its snores. But more than anything, she wondered what the dragon dreamed about. "Do dragons dream of treasure?" she once asked her grandmother, who was busy knitting by the hearth. "Perhaps," her grandmother replied with a smile. "Or maybe they dream of flying to the stars or swimming in the deepest oceans." Elara's imagination ran wild at the thought. She often lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling of her little room, wondering what worlds might exist in Solmere's dreams. One golden afternoon, while the village buzzed with preparations for the annual harvest festival, Elara wandered off to the dragon's resting place. She had brought with her a small basket of flowers, wild daisies, sunlit marigolds, and a sprig of lavender, her favourite. As she approached the dragon, she marvelled at its sheer size. Solmere's massive claws were curled like ancient roots, and its tail stretched far into the forest, coiled around a cluster of trees. Its breath rose in soft clouds, carrying a faint, otherworldly scent of something both earthy and celestial. Elara tiptoed closer, her heart pounding with a mix of excitement and nervousness. She placed the flowers gently near the dragon's snout, where its warm breath stirred the petals. But as she turned to leave, her foot caught on a root, and she tumbled forward right onto the dragon's massive paw. For a moment, everything was still. Then Solmere's eyes, which had been closed for centuries, fluttered open. They were the most beautiful eyes Elara had ever seen, swirling with colours like a twilight sky. But before she could marvel at them for long, she felt a strange tugging sensation, as though the ground beneath her had vanished. The world around her shimmered, the colours of the forest bleeding into one another like watercolours on a page. And then, with a soft whoosh, she found herself somewhere entirely new. Elara gasped as she looked around. She was standing in a world unlike anything she had ever seen. Mountains sparkled like crystal, their peaks catching the light of 1,000 swirling stars. Oceans stretched endlessly, their waves glowing with a soft, silvery light. The air was warm and fragrant, filled with the distant sound of music, gentle and melodic, like the hum of the universe itself. "Welcome," a deep, rumbling voice said behind her. Elara turned to see Solmia, now wide awake but somehow different. In this dream world, the dragon seemed lighter, almost ethereal, its scales shimmering with every color imaginable. "Where am I?" Elara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You are in my dreams," Solmia replied, its voice like distant thunder. "Few have ever entered this place. How curious that you were able to find your way here." "I didn't mean to," Elara said quickly. "I just tripped." The dragon chuckled, a sound that echoed across the mountains. "No matter. Since you are here, perhaps you would like to explore." Elara's eyes lit up. "I'd love to!" And so, their journey began. Over the next few hours, or was it days? Time seemed to work differently here. Elara and Solmia travelled through the dragon's dreams. As they began their journey through the dream world, Elara marvelled at the vibrant beauty of the land. The dreamscape was alive with possibilities. Each step revealed something new and wondrous. Their first stop was a river made entirely of stars. The water shimmered and flowed with tiny glowing constellations, each sparkling droplet carrying a fragment of the cosmos. Elara knelt by the riverbank, dipping her fingers into the cool, luminous water. "These are memories of the universe," Solmia explained, lying beside her. "Each star carries a story, and every ripple in this river is a tale waiting to be told." Curious, Elara cupped some of the water in her hands. Instantly, she was transported into a memory. She saw a great phoenix rising from the ashes of a burning forest, its wings casting shadows like firelight. She gasped and let the water fall back into the river. "Careful," Solmia chuckled. "The stories can be overwhelming if you're not ready." Still, Elara couldn't resist touching the water again. This time, she saw a vast kingdom under the sea, where merfolk with glowing tails danced in harmony with bioluminescent creatures. "We can stay here all day," Elara said in awe, but Solmia nudged her gently forward. "There is much more to see, little one." Next, they reached the floating Isles of Light, a cluster of glowing islands that drifted lazily in the sky, tethered to the ground by shimmering beams of energy. The air buzzed with an electric hum, and flowers of light sprouted from the floating soil, opening and closing like tiny lanterns. Solmia spread his wings and lifted Elara onto his back. Together, they soared between the islands, the wind carrying the scent of something sweet and otherworldly. On one of the isles, they found a hidden garden filled with musical flowers. Each bloom emitted a different note, and when the wind passed through them, the garden played a hauntingly beautiful melody. Elara danced among the flowers, her laughter mingling with the song. "Does this place exist in the real world?" she asked, breathless with wonder. "In some ways, yes," Solmia replied. "But only those who dream deeply enough can find it." Their journey soon brought them to a vast labyrinth of shifting golden walls. The maze seemed alive, with the walls growing and reshaping themselves as they moved. Elara hesitated at the entrance. "What if we get lost?" Solmia smiled, his scales gleaming like molten gold. "The labyrinth reflects your heart. Trust yourself, and you will find the way." Inside, Elara marvelled at the labyrinth's beauty. The walls shimmered with images from her own memories, her grandmother's smile, the village festival, even the day she first saw Solmia sleeping by the mountain. But as she ventured deeper, the walls darkened, and shadowy figures began to emerge. "Are these my fears?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yes," Solmia said gently, standing protectively beside her. but fear cannot harm you if you face it. With the dragon's guidance, Elara confronted the shadows, her fear of being alone, her self-doubt, and the times she had felt too small or too scared. As she acknowledged each one, the shadows dissolved into light, illuminating the labyrinth's path. When they reached the heart of the maze, they found a glowing pool. Elara gazed into it and saw her reflection, not as a child, but as a confident, radiant version of herself. "This is who you are," Solmia said softly. "Never forget it." Finally, they reached the ocean of dreams, a vast expanse of glowing water that mirrored the sky. Above them, the stars seemed to ripple, as if they too were part of the ocean. Strange, glowing creatures swam through the air, their translucent bodies trailing ribbons of light. Elara waded into the water, which felt warm and comforting like a soft embrace. The ocean seemed to hum with life, each wave carrying whispers of dreams from across the world. "Can we swim here?" she asked eagerly. "Not just swim," Solmia replied with a twinkle in his eye. "We can soar." With a great leap, the dragon launched them into the air, diving and twisting through the waves of light. Elara clung to his back, laughing as the stars seemed to dance around them. As they descended, they noticed a dark patch in the ocean, a swirling vortex of shadows. "What is that?" Elara asked. "It is the place where dreams are forgotten," Solmia said gravely. "A void where light and hope are lost." Elara felt a pang of sadness. "Can we fix it?" Solmia hesitated, then nodded. "Perhaps, but it will take great courage." Together, they approached the vortex. The closer they got, the colder the air became, and the light around them dimmed. Elara's heart pounded, but she refused to turn back. "Stay close," Solmia said, his voice steady despite the growing darkness. As they reached the edge of the void, Elara noticed fragments of light swirling within it, lost dreams struggling to escape. She reached out, her hands trembling, and caught one of the fragments. Instantly, a memory of a child's laughter filled the air, bringing warmth and light back to the surrounding waters. "We can save them!" Elara exclaimed. One by one, she and Solmia gathered the fragments, weaving them back into the ocean's fabric. The more they worked, the brighter the ocean became, until the void was completely restored. As they emerged from the ocean, Elara felt a deep sense of accomplishment. She had faced her fears, restored forgotten dreams, and discovered a courage she hadn't known she possessed. Solmia gazed at her with pride. "You have done more than most ever could, little one. You are truly remarkable." Elara smiled, her heart full. "I couldn't have done it without you." With their bond stronger than ever, they made their way back to the Meadow of Stars, where their journey had begun. Though Elara knew her time in the dream world was coming to an end, she felt ready to return to her own world with a piece of Solmia's magic forever in her heart. "Thank you for letting me see your world. It's more amazing than anything I could have imagined," Elara said. With a soft rumble of gratitude, Solmia lowered its head. "It is time for you to return. But know this, you will always carry a piece of this dream within you." The world around her began to fade, and Elara felt herself being gently pulled back to the forest. When Elara opened her eyes, she was lying at the foot of the dragon, the flowers she had brought still scattered around her. Solmia was once again asleep, its dreams undisturbed. She returned to the village with a story to tell, a story of courage, wonder, and the magic of dreams. And though the villagers were skeptical at first, they couldn't help but notice how much Elara had changed. She was braver, more confident, and carried a light in her eyes that hadn't been there before. From that day on, the legend of Elara and the sleeping dragon spread far and wide, a tale whispered under the stars by dreamers everywhere. Once upon a time, in a quiet village nestled between rolling hills and silver streams, there stood a peculiar little house at the very edge of the world, or at least, that's what the villagers believed. It belonged to Master Elowen, the clockmaker, an old man with hands as steady as time itself and eyes that held the weight of many ticking years. Few had seen him up close. The villagers whispered about the strange golden lights that glowed from his windows at night, and the rhythmic ticking that echoed from his workshop long after the town had gone to sleep. Some said he was a sorcerer, weaving spells into his clocks. Others believed he was merely lonely, lost in the gears and hands of time. No one knew of his greatest secret. Beyond the doors of his quiet home, past the gears and cogs and pendulums that swung in measured harmony, lay a hidden garden, a garden unlike any other. It did not bloom in daylight. It did not wilt in the cold. It waited, and only when the clock struck midnight, when the world held its breath between one day and the next, did the garden awaken. But no one had ever seen it, until the night Asta wandered too far. Asta was a child of restless wonder, always chasing the wind, always searching for something unseen. While the other children played by the river and gathered wildflowers, Asta wandered beyond the village, tracing the paths where no one else dared to go. It was on one such evening, with the moon full and golden, that Asta heard it, the sound of ticking, not from a clock, but from the earth itself. Tick, 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 like a heart buried beneath the soil. Asta followed the sound through the whispering trees, past the old clockmaker's house, until they stumbled upon a great iron gate entwined with ivy. It was locked, or at least it should have been. But as Asta pressed a small hand against the metal, the latch clicked open, as if it had been waiting for them all along. Beyond the gate, bathed in silver moonlight, was a garden unlike any Asta had ever seen. The garden was alive, not in the way of ordinary flowers that swayed in the wind or reached for the sun, but in a way that made the air shimmer with quiet magic. The trees bore glowing silver leaves, and the vines curled like gentle clock hands, spiraling toward the sky. But the most breathtaking sight of all were the flowers. Not red, not yellow, not blue, but each one blooming in golden light, like tiny suns captured in petals. And then, as if sensing Asta's arrival, the flowers began to whisper. Soft voices, gentle and ancient, filled the air like drifting melodies. Each flower held a story, waiting to be told. And so, with wonder in his eyes, Asta knelt before the first glowing bloom, listening as the petals unfurled a tale. The first flower trembled, its golden glow flickering like candlelight. And then, in a voice as soft as wind through the trees, it spoke. "Listen, child of wonder. Let me tell you the tale of the lost star." And as Asta listened, the world around them began to blur, shifting and changing, until they found themselves no longer in the garden, but among the stars themselves. There once was a star, small and bright, that fell from the heavens before it was ready to shine. It tumbled through the sky, past silver clouds and sleeping birds, until it landed in a forest where no one could see it. For many years, the star remained hidden among the roots, watching the world from below, longing to return to the sky. One day, a young girl with a lantern passed through the woods. She was searching for something, though she did not know what. When she found the star, she did not see a fallen thing. She saw a light waiting to rise, so she carried the star to the highest mountain, where the wind whispered secrets of the sky, and with a final breath, she set it free. The star rose, trembling, glowing, brighter than ever before, and from that night on, it burned the longest in the sky, a reminder that even those who fall can rise again. As the story ended, the flower's light dimmed, and Asta, still breathless from the journey, turned to the next bloom, eager to hear another tale. The second flower hummed deep and low, like the sound of turning gears. "This is the tale of the timekeeper's lament," it whispered. And again, the world shifted. Asta found himself in a vast, endless hall, where thousands of clocks ticked in unison. At the center stood a woman draped in golden chains, her eyes glowing like clock hands frozen in place. "I am the timekeeper," she said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. "I once moved freely, bending time to weave the stories of the world. But I made a mistake. I tried to hold on to time itself, and now I am bound." Asta, with a heart full of wonder, stepped forward. "How do I set you free?" The timekeeper smiled. "You cannot stop time, nor can you hold it," she whispered, "but you can live within it." And with those words, the chains crumbled, and time itself flowed once more. The story faded, and Asta opened his eyes back in the garden. One last flower remained. The final flower swayed as if dancing, its petals glowing in soft waves. It told the story of two lovers, one of the sun, one of the moon, who could never meet but danced at the edge of dawn and dusk, forever caught in an eternal waltz. Their love was written in the colors of the sky, their longing woven into the stars themselves, and though they could never touch, they found each other in every sunrise, every sunset, knowing they would always return to one another. As the last story ended, Asta turned to find Master Eloin standing behind them, his kind eyes watching. "You have heard the garden's stories," he said softly. "Now, do you understand?" Asta looked around at the glowing midnight garden, at the whispering petals, at the ticking air that hummed with old magic. Each story was a piece of time, a memory that refused to fade. "This garden is not just mine," Eloin said. "It belongs to those who listen." As dawn touched the sky, the garden began to fade. The flowers closed their petals, waiting once more for midnight's return. But in Asta's heart, the stories remained, alive, waiting, glowing like tiny stars. And from that night on, the child who wandered too far became a keeper of tales, carrying the whispers of the midnight garden to those who still believed in magic. Once upon a time, there was once a king who loved to dream. His name was King Alden, and though he ruled a great and prosperous kingdom, his heart belonged to the world of dreams. While other rulers spent their days drafting laws or waging wars, Alden spent his nights exploring lands that only existed in slumber, forests spun from stardust, cities built on floating clouds, rivers that sang lullabies as they flowed. His people adored him, for he was a kind and gentle ruler, always listening to their worries with a patient ear. But they also whispered among themselves, wondering why their king always seemed just a little bit drowsy, as though his mind drifted between worlds, even while awake. You see, King Alden was not just a dreamer, he was a master of dreams, Each night, as he laid his head on his golden pillow, he closed his eyes and stepped into his dream world as if walking through an open door. He had 100 favorite dreams, each one more wonderful than the last. But among them all, there was one he cherished most, the dream of the celestial garden. It was a place of pure magic, a garden where the flowers glowed like tiny lanterns, where silver butterflies hummed lullabies, and where the sky was painted in endless twilight, neither night nor day. And at the very heart of the garden, there stood a magnificent tree with sapphire leaves, the dream tree. Its branches swayed without wind, and whenever King Alden sat beneath it, he felt a peace so deep that he never wanted to wake. But one night, something terrible happened. As King Alden drifted into sleep, expecting to step into his beloved celestial garden, he was met with nothingness, a vast, endless darkness, no glowing flowers, no sapphire-leaved tree, no dream at all. His favorite dream was gone. He woke with a start, his heart pounding. He tried to return to sleep, to search for the dream, but no matter how hard he tried, the celestial garden remained lost, like a candle snuffed out in the night. Morning came, and the king, looking more tired than ever, called for the wisest dreamers in the land. "I have lost my most cherished dream," he told them. "How can I find it again?" The scholars whispered among themselves, flipping through dusty books of ancient knowledge. Finally, an elderly dreamweaver spoke. "Dreams, Your Majesty, are like birds on the wind. Sometimes they stray too far. But worry not. If a dream is truly yours, it can always be found again. However, retrieving it will not be easy. You must journey beyond the waking world and seek help from one who knows the paths of lost dreams." "And who might that be?" asked King Alden, leaning forward. "The fox of the whispering woods," the dreamweaver said. That very evening, as the sun melted into hues of pink and violet, King Alden set out from his castle, alone except for a lantern filled with starlight, a special gift from his royal astronomer who had captured the glow of a comet's tail. He rode deep into the whispering woods, a forest so ancient that the trees spoke in rustling sighs, telling secrets of the past. Shadows danced between the trunks, and unseen creatures scurried through the undergrowth. But the king was not afraid. He had travelled through far stranger lands in his dreams. And then, beneath the boughs of a gnarled old oak, he found the fox. It was no ordinary fox. Its fur was woven from twilight itself, deep blue with streaks of silver. Its eyes gleamed like twin moons, and when it spoke, its voice was like the hush of wind through leaves. "You seek a lost dream, do you not?" the fox said, tilting its head. King Alden nodded. "Can you help me find it?" The fox grinned. "Perhaps, but dreams are not found, they are remembered. Tell me, King, what made this dream so precious to you?" Alden hesitated. "It was peaceful, safe. It was where I felt most like myself." The fox's tail flicked. "Then you must journey where all forgotten dreams go, to the Valley of Echoes. But beware, for not all dreams there are friendly. Some are lost for a reason." Following the fox's directions, Alden travelled beyond the edges of the known world. He crossed silver deserts where the sand sang in the wind. He sailed across an ocean of mist, where shadowy figures whispered forgotten lullabies. Finally, he reached the Valley of Echoes, a place where the air shimmered like water, and old dreams wandered, searching for their dreamers. There, he saw the celestial garden, but it was broken. The glowing flowers had dimmed. The sapphire-leaved tree was wilting. The peace he once felt there was gone. And then, a shadow stepped forward. It was himself. A version of King Alden, made of mist and starlight, stood beneath the dying tree. This dream king spoke, his voice a gentle echo. "You abandoned me," the dream king whispered. "You dreamed of me for years, but you never truly saw me." King Alden's breath caught. He had thought the dream was just a beautiful escape, but now he understood. It was a part of him, a part he had neglected in his waking life. He knelt before the dying tree and placed his hands on the bark. "I see you now," he whispered. The tree shuddered, its sapphire leaves trembling. Light flowed from the king's hands, spreading through the branches, rekindling the magic that had been fading. The garden slowly came back to life. King Alden awoke just before dawn, his heart full and light. He had recovered his most treasured dream, but more importantly, he had discovered why it had been lost. Because dreams must be nurtured, just as one nurtures a kingdom, a friendship, or even oneself. From that day forward, the king no longer lived only for the night. He brought the beauty of dreams into the waking world. He planted glowing gardens in the palace, filled the air with music, and encouraged his people to dream not just in sleep, but in their lives. And every night, as he laid his head upon his golden pillow, he smiled, knowing that his celestial garden, his dream, and his heart would never be lost again. And so he ruled wisely and dreamed beautifully ever after. Once upon a time, there was once a tiny moth named Luna, no larger than a raindrop, with wings as soft as whispers and as pale as the dawn's first light. She lived in the hollow of an ancient willow tree, nestled between its roots, where the world was gentle and the air smelled of damp earth and fallen leaves. Luna was not like the other moths. While they flitted about the warm glow of lanterns and flickering candle flames, she dreamed of something greater. She longed to touch the moon. Each night, when the sky unfurled like a vast velvet cloak and the silver moon climbed high, she would watch in quiet wonder. But what fascinated her most was the way the moon sent beams of light cascading through the sky, delicate, shimmering strands that looked close enough to grasp. "What is it?" she often wondered. The other moths laughed at her curiosity. "Why chase something so far away when the glow of a lantern is warm and near?" they said. But Luna could not let it go. And so, one fateful night, Luna made a promise to herself. "I will catch a moonbeam." She didn't know how, nor what she would do once she caught one. But deep inside her tiny heart, she felt that if she could only touch its glow, something inside her would shine forever. And so her journey began. Luna fluttered her wings and soared out of the willow's hollow, her tiny body trembling with excitement. The cool night air wrapped around her, and the grass below glowed with the soft twinkle of fireflies. "Where are you going in such a hurry, little one?" a golden firefly asked, hovering beside her. "I'm going to catch a moonbeam," Luna replied, her voice no louder than the wind through the grass. The firefly blinked its light. "Why chase something so far away? Stay with us and we will light the night for you." Luna hesitated. The fireflies were kind and their glow was warm, but when she glanced up at the sky, she saw the moonbeam still waiting, calling her onward. "Thank you, but I must go," she whispered, and with a flutter of her wings, she left the meadow behind. Beyond the meadow, a silver river wound its way through the land. reflecting the moonlight in glistening ripples. Luna hovered above it, watching the way the water seemed to shimmer as though it held the very moonbeam she sought. Curious, she dipped lower and brushed her wing against the surface. The water trembled and sent rings of light outward, but when she tried to grasp it, it slipped through her tiny feet like silk. A fish with scales like polished glass leapt from the water and smiled. "Are you looking for something, little moth?" "A moonbeam," Luna said, frustrated. "I thought I found it, but it vanished." The fish laughed gently. "Moonlight dances, but it does not stay. Perhaps what you seek is not something to hold, but something to follow." Luna pondered this, but the moonbeam above still glowed, drifting toward the horizon. "I cannot stop now," she murmured, and with one last glance at the shining river, she flew on. As the night stretched on, Luna's wings grew tired. She perched upon the branch of a great oak tree, where an old owl watched her with keen golden eyes. "You are far from home, little one," the owl hooted. "Where are you flying to in such haste?" "I'm chasing a moonbeam," she admitted, her wings drooping with exhaustion. The owl tilted his head. "And what will you do once you catch it?" Luna opened her mouth to answer, but no words came. She had not thought that far ahead. The owl chuckled. "Be careful, young moth. Some things are meant to be admired, not held." Luna frowned but thanked the owl for his wisdom. Still, she would not give up. She had come too far. With a deep breath, she leapt back into the night, following the moonbeam as it drifted higher and higher toward the mountain peaks. The air grew thinner as Luna reached the highest peak, where the world seemed to stretch forever beneath her. The moon was closer now, its glow bathing the mountaintop in silver, and there, floating just beyond her reach, was the moonbeam. It shimmered like a strand of silk, pulsing with a light so soft and perfect that Luna thought her heart might burst. "I found it," she said. With one final flutter, she reached out. Her tiny feet brushed against the beam, and for a moment she felt as if she were made of light itself. But just as quickly as she touched it, the moonbeam dissolved into the wind, slipping through her grasp like mist. Luna gasped. Had she failed? Had she traveled so far only to find that moonbeams could not be caught? As she hovered there in silence, she looked down at herself, and her breath caught. She was glowing. Soft, silvery light pulsed from her wings, reflecting the very radiance she had been chasing all along. She had not caught the moonbeam, it had become part of her. With a joyful laugh, she spread her wings and let the light carry her back down, the whole world beneath her bathed in silver glow. When Luna returned to the willow tree, the fireflies blinked in greeting, the river shimmered its welcome, and the old owl nodded in approval. "You have changed," he observed. Luna smiled. "I chased a moonbeam and found something greater. I found my own light." She flew over the river, where the silver fish leapt joyfully. "You were right," she told him. "The light was never something to grasp, it was something to follow." Finally, she perched on the old oak tree, where the owl watched her with knowing eyes. "You understand now," he said. Luna nodded, and from that night on, whenever the moon rose high and silver beams stretched across the sky, Luna would flutter through them, not to catch them, but to dance among them, carrying the light she had discovered inside her heart. For she had learned that some dreams are not meant to be captured. Some dreams are meant to illuminate the path ahead. And so, the tiny moth who once chased the moon became a light of her own. Once upon a time, in a quiet town where the rooftops whispered in the wind and the stars blinked like tiny knowing eyes, there lived a boy named Haru. Haru was a small boy with big dreams, but his heart carried a loneliness too heavy for someone so young. He had once shared his days with a best friend, a girl named Eiko, who laughed like chimes in the summer breeze. They had spent their afternoons chasing dragonflies by the river, their feet splashing through the water as they shouted secrets only the wind could hear. But one day, Eiko was gone. No one told Haru where she went, only that her family had to leave and she wouldn't be coming back. The town remained the same. Its cherry blossoms still bloomed, the river still sang its lullaby, and the sky still stretched endlessly above. But for Haru, everything felt different. The world was quieter without Eiko's laughter, and the wind no longer carried secrets, only silence. Then, one evening, as the golden light of sunset poured through his window, Haru's grandmother sat beside him with a story. "There is an old legend, my dear," she said, her voice soft like the rustling of autumn leaves. "If someone folds 1,000 paper cranes, the gods will grant them a wish." She placed a single sheet of paper in Haru's hands, thin, delicate, and waiting to be shaped into something new. A promise bloomed in Haru's heart. "If I fold 1,000 cranes," he whispered, "Eiko will come back." And so he began. Haru's room soon became a sea of paper. Sheets in every color, soft blues, pale pinks, golden yellows, covered his desk, his bed, and the wooden floor. With careful hands, he folded each crane, pressing each crease with quiet determination. 1, 2, 3. At first, his fingers fumbled, and the shapes looked nothing like cranes, more like wrinkled leaves caught in a storm. But he didn't stop. With each fold, his movements grew steadier, his touch more certain. By the time he reached 50, he no longer had to think about the steps. His hands knew the way, like a river flowing toward the sea. By 100, his tiny room felt different. The cranes perched on his shelves, hung from the ceiling like stars, and lined his windowsill where the morning light kissed their delicate wings. But one evening, as he sat at his desk, folding yet another crane, doubt crept into his heart. What if the legend isn't real? He looked at the tiny bird in his hands. It was just paper, silent, unmoving. What if Eiko never came back? What if he was only making wishes on the wind? Haru clenched his fists. "No," he told himself, "I have to keep going." And so he did. Time moved in quiet ripples. The cherry blossoms fell, their petals dancing through the streets like drifting snow. Then summer arrived, bringing warm rains that tapped gently against his window as he folded through the night. 300 cranes, then 500, then 700. With every crane, he whispered the same wish. "Bring Eiko back." But Eiko did not return. One morning, as Haru sat by the river where they used to play, he held a small crane in his hands and sighed. "Do you think she'll remember me?" he asked the wind. The crane did not answer, but a butterfly landed on its wing, resting there as if to say, "Keep going." So he did. The day Haru reached 999, the world outside was quiet and still. Snow had begun to fall. soft and gentle, wrapping the town in a hush of white. In the golden glow of his paper-filled room, Haru picked up the last sheet. His hands did not tremble, but his heart did. With the final fold, the last crane took shape, delicate, perfect, filled with every whispered wish he had ever made. 1,000, he breathed. He waited, but nothing happened. No magic wind, no glowing light, no whispered voice from the heavens. The cranes sat in silent stillness, their wings frozen mid-flight. Haru's chest ached. His fingers curled around the last crane. He had believed, he had hoped, but Aiko was still gone. Tears welled in his eyes. Had it all been for nothing? Then, from outside, a voice he hadn't heard in so long. Haru! His heart stopped. He turned, and there, standing at the gate, was Aiko, older, taller, but her eyes were the same light, the same warmth. Haru ran. The snow crunched beneath his feet, the cold air stung his cheeks, but he didn't care. Aiko! She laughed, a sound like chimes in the wind. I found one of your cranes, she said, holding up a small golden bird. And I knew I had to come back. Haru looked past her, and his breath caught. The wind had carried his cranes far beyond his room. They fluttered in the trees, lined the fences, and danced in the sky like tiny messengers. He had sent his wish into the world, and the world had listened. The legend was true after all, not because of magic, but because hope, when folded with love, always finds its way home.
Once upon a time, in a kingdom where twilight never faded and the stars whispered secrets to the earth, there ruled a queen unlike any other. The Dusk Queen, Selena, was born in the hush of twilight, her eyes reflecting the deep purples and blues of the ever-setting sun. She wore a crown of moonstone, a gift from the celestial spirits, which allowed her to command the cycle of night and day. With a touch, she could summon the stars or let the sun rise, balancing the world between rest and wakefulness. But beneath her regal grace lay a quiet loneliness. She was bound to the moonstone's power, forever walking the line between light and darkness. On the other side of the kingdom, in the shadowed alleys of the lower city, lived a young thief named Nico, clever, swift, and unseen. He had never believed in the Dusk Queen's magic, until the night he stole her crown. The kingdom of Vespera was a realm caught between day and night, where golden lanterns flickered against violet skies, and fireflies danced above silver rivers. The royal palace loomed over the land like an ethereal dream, its spires woven with vines that bloomed only under the moon's glow. In the bustling city below, markets hummed with merchants selling twilight-colored silks and jars of bottled stardust, while thieves and storytellers wove their own kind of magic in the alleyways. One fateful night, Nico, lured by whispers of fortune, crept into the queen's sanctuary and stole the moonstone crown. The moment his fingers brushed its cool surface, the world shuddered. The delicate balance collapsed. Shadows grew restless, stretching farther than they should, and the sun refused to rise. Selena awoke with a gasp, feeling the emptiness where her power had once been. As darkness thickened, she knew she had to find the thief who had stolen her crown before the world was lost to endless night. In the heart of Vespera's lower city, Nico ran. The moonstone crown, cool and heavy in his arms, pulsed with a strange energy like a living heartbeat. He had stolen countless treasures before: gilded goblets, silk purses, jeweled rings. But this crown was different. It was not just a prize. It was watching him. Behind him, the sky quivered. The stars, once soft and twinkling, flickered erratically. The streets of the city twisted as if the shadows themselves were shifting. Nico ducked into an alleyway, his breath ragged. He needed to sell the crown before sunrise. Except there was no sunrise. The night stretched on unnaturally, and a cold, eerie hush settled over the city. Even the usual midnight revelers had grown uneasy, their laughter dimming into whispers. And then he heard it, a voice, soft yet commanding, weaving through the darkness like a thread of silver. "Return what is not yours, thief." Nico whirled around. At the end of the alley stood a woman unlike any he had ever seen. Her long, dark cloak shimmered with constellations, her silver hair cascading over her shoulders like mist. But it was her eyes that held him in place, deep, endless pools of twilight, filled with sorrow and unyielding strength. The Dusk Queen had found him. Nico's instincts screamed at him to run, but his feet were rooted in place. He had expected palace guards, not this spectral, otherworldly presence. Selena stepped forward, her movements fluid as a ripple over still water. She did not raise her voice. She did not demand. She simply extended her hand. "Give it back." Nico swallowed. "I didn't know it was yours." Her gaze sharpened. "You knew it belonged to someone. You knew it was important." The crown pulsed in his hands. Shadows stretched toward him, not threateningly, but with a quiet, patient weight, as if the night itself was listening. He licked his lips. "And if I don't?" Selena's expression did not change, but the wind stirred, carrying a whisper that made the hairs on his neck rise. "Then the balance will break completely." Nico hesitated. He had spent his whole life stealing from the rich, outsmarting merchants, dodging city guards. But never had he stolen something that felt so alive. "Why don't you just take it?" he asked. A flicker of sadness crossed Selena's face. "Because power stolen cannot simply be taken back. It must be given willingly." For the first time Nico saw it, the weariness in her stance, the weight she carried. The crown was more than magic. It was a burden, and he had no idea what to do with it. Nico sighed, shifting uncomfortably. "So what? I just hand it over, and everything goes back to normal." Selena shook her head. If only it were that simple. She lifted her gaze toward the sky, where the stars had begun to flicker erratically, winking in and out of existence. "The balance has already started to unravel. You set something into motion, and now you must finish it." Nico stiffened. "Finish what?" The queen's voice was calm but unyielding. "You must return the crown to its rightful place. With me." Nico groaned. "You mean I have to go back to the palace? That place is crawling with guards." Selena's lips curved slightly. "Oh thief, there are worse things than guards." A chill crept down Nico's spine. As if to prove her point, the wind howled, and the shadows at the edges of the alley writhed. The night itself seemed to shudder. Something was coming. And if they didn't move soon, Nico knew it would find them first. Selena led Nico through winding back streets and hidden paths, places he thought only he knew. But the queen moved as if she had walked them 1,000 times. The city was different now. Buildings loomed taller, their windows dark like watching eyes. The cobblestones beneath their feet seemed to stretch and twist when they weren't looking directly at them. Then suddenly the streets ended. A vast chasm yawned before them, filled with swirling mist. "The hollow roads," Selena murmured. Nico took a step back. "That's not supposed to be there." She nodded. "And yet, here it is." The hollow roads were an old legend, whispered about in hushed tones, a place where lost things wandered. And now, with the balance broken, it had appeared in the heart of the city. Selena turned to him. "If you want to fix what you've done, we must cross." Nico swallowed hard. He had spent his life avoiding the unknown, slipping through cracks and shadows. But now the shadows were moving, and there was nowhere left to hide. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward, into the mist, into the hollow roads, and into the unknown. The mist swallowed Nico and Selena whole. It curled around their ankles like living tendrils, whispering in voices too soft to understand. The hollow road stretched before them, not a bridge nor a path, but a shifting expanse of pale stone veined with silver. Nico clenched the moonstone crown tighter. Every instinct screamed for him to turn back. But he couldn't. The first step felt like stepping into nothingness. The second like walking on glass. The third. A voice slithered through the mist. "You are lost." Nico spun around, but Selena merely stood still, her face calm but watchful. The mist thickened, forming hazy figures. They flickered and wavered, distorted, unreal. But as one stepped forward, Nico's breath caught in his throat. It was his mother, or at least something that wore her face. "Nico," she whispered, eyes filled with longing. "Come home, my son." He hadn't seen her since she died, and yet here she was. The familiar warmth of her voice made his chest tighten. He took an uncertain step forward. "Don't," Selena warned sharply. The figure of his mother smiled, a sweet, sad smile, before her face twisted into something wrong, something hungry. Shadows bled from her form, creeping toward him. The hollow roads were testing him. "You must not believe what you see," Selena said, stepping closer. "They are only echoes of what once was." Nico tore his gaze away, his pulse racing. "How do we get through?" Selena extended her hand. "We hold on to the truth." For the first time he hesitated, then slowly he placed his hand in hers. The mist shrieked, recoiling like a living thing. And just like that, the illusions shattered. They pressed forward, the path solidifying beneath their feet. Nico didn't dare look back. On the other side of the hollow roads, the sky was different, darker, heavier. They had reached the threshold of twilight, the final barrier before the Dusk Queen's palace. But something waited for them there. A towering figure stood before the palace gates, its body woven from pure shadow. Its eyes were empty voids, its fingers long and clawed. It did not speak, did not move. Selena inhaled sharply. "The Shadowborn." Nico's throat tightened. "That doesn't sound good. They guard what is sacred." She turned to him, her expression grim. "And they do not let intruders pass." Nico stepped forward hesitantly. "Okay, but we're not intruders. You're the queen, shouldn't they let you through?" Selena's expression darkened. "I am not the one holding the crown." The moment she said it, the Shadowborn turned its empty gaze toward Nico. He barely had time to react before it lunged. Nico rolled out of the way as the Shadowborn's claws raked across the ground, carving deep, jagged lines into the stone. Selena raised a hand, and darkness twisted around her fingers like silk. "You must prove you are worthy," she said. "If you run, it will never stop hunting you." Nico's heart pounded. He was no warrior. He was a thief, liar, a survivor. He had spent his whole life running. But this time he couldn't. He looked down at the crown in his hands. It pulsed, as if waiting for him to decide. The Shadowborn struck again. This time Nico didn't dodge. He stood firm, lifting the moonstone crown above his head. A deep, shuddering silence fell. The Shadowborn halted inches away from him, and then slowly it sank to one knee. Selena's breath hitched. "You passed the trial." The Shadowborn melted into darkness, vanishing like smoke. Nico exhaled shakily. That was terrifying. Selena looked at him with new eyes. "And yet you did not run." Nico wasn't sure what had just happened, but something inside him felt different. He had spent his whole life in the shadows, but for the first time he had faced them, and he had won. The palace doors creaked open, revealing a vast, moonlit chamber. At its center stood an altar, carved from silver and night glass. Selena turned to Nico. "Place the crown where it belongs." Nico hesitated. He had spent years stealing treasures, running from his past, avoiding responsibility. But here he was, holding something that was never meant to be his. Slowly, reverently, he placed the moonstone crown on the altar. The moment his fingers left it, the entire room shuddered. A rush of silver light exploded outward, flooding the palace, the city, the sky itself. The air hummed with magic, and for the first time since the crown had been stolen, the world felt whole again. The night sighed. The balance had been restored. Selena turned to him, her gaze filled with quiet gratitude. "You did well, Nico." He gave her a small, tired smile. For a thief. For someone who finally chose to stand still. Outside, the horizon glowed with the first hint of dawn. For the first time in years, Nico didn't feel like running. The city of Vespera woke to a sky filled with hues of soft gold and twilight purple, the perfect balance between night and day. The people stirred, unaware of the chaos that had nearly unraveled their world. Nico stood beside Selena at the palace balcony, watching the sunrise. "So what now?" he asked. Selena smiled. "That is up to you." For the first time in his life, Nico realized he had a choice. He could go back to the shadows or he could step into something new. And as the sun kissed the sky, he made his decision. After all, he had spent a lifetime running from the light. Maybe it was time to learn how to stand in it.